Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Denise Shannon and today I'll be covering the Rancher overview training. Hopefully all of you can see my slides. Let me actually switch to the slides. I am joined here today with Josh Curl. He'll be helping me answer questions and let me know if you guys have anything specific you want me to demo. He'll let me know about it. Josh, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so in today's training today, we are going to do a technical introduction to Rancher. I only have like maybe 3 more slides. I'll be demoing everything about our product, just going through everything I can. We welcome questions. This is really for you guys out there to learn about Rancher, and if you have questions, if you don't know how to do something or you've heard about something and you'd like me to demo it, please feel free to ask. And I know the training is set up from 10 or for an hour, 10 to 11 my time, but I know a lot of you out there might be on a different time zone. We won't leave until all your questions are answered. So just to give you a timing perspective, usually our training sessions last about an hour and a half, closer to that. And even when I do that, I can't cover everything, obviously, in Rancher. There's just, as the product has grown, we have more and more topics, more functionality, so it's a little bit challenging for me to cover everything. I've also gotten feedback in a couple of my more recent trainings that I'm trying to cover too much too fast, so I'm going to try and go a little slower, just so if you're brand new to Rancher, it's easier for you to follow along. And if as you get into Rancher, we run these monthly, so if you either have a question or whatever, you want to come back and see something else again, please feel free to come again. We have been thinking about doing another training for a little more in-depth, so after you've gotten started. If that's something you're interested in, feel free to let us know. So before we get started, just a couple of things that are really good to use or to know about for Rancher is we have a doc site, so docs.rancher.com. In here, we cover basically everything that I cover today. You should be able to find some kind of documentation about it and how you did it. We also have forums on rancher.com, so like I said, if you actually have questions afterwards, a great place is to, our community is really active, to ask in the forums. If you find a bug, you can ask in the forums. You could file an issue in GitHub. So our community is fairly active. I try to be as active as possible in these places as well. And then this is, I think, our last slide really of the key topics of today. So I'm going to cover over how to set up Rancher, setting up access control, and what those mean, and kind of, I'll probably spend a majority of the time going over a lot of the options there. We'll go through about what an environment is and how you can create them. I'll show you where you can attach your private registries. We'll add some hosts. We'll start creating our services and stacks, and then do some load balancing. And I can show you how Service Discovery works. And then we'll cover over everything I'll start doing will really be in the UI, and then I'll cover over how does that work with the API, and give you a little bit of what the API looks like, and then we'll talk about CLI and how that works with Rancher. We'll go over briefly of what the Rancher catalog is, how you can deploy templates from the catalog, and then seeing how time goes and what the interest is in, I'll probably spin up at least a Kubernetes environment set up so you guys can take a look to see how that looks. And then, and then there are a lot more topics I know usually that people have asked that we can see if we have time for. If people are interested or a specific topic, feel free to ask in the questions. The questions is located in the GoToWebinar panel on your side. There should be a little questions box that you can start asking your questions, and then Josh will be answering what he can, and if there's something that someone has asked to demo or needs further clarification, he'll pop in and let us know, and then we'll cover that. Okay, let's switch to my my main screen. Let's get out of this. So the only thing I've done before we got started today was I started up a host. I have 7 hosts running in AWS. They're all running Rancher OS. The great thing about Rancher OS is that you actually don't need to install Docker. All you do is launch a Rancher OS instance and you can start running Docker commands. So that's something great if you're just getting started with Docker, an easy way to get started. And I have just installed Rancher onto one of my boxes. Let's see, so you can see, if I do a Docker PS, you can see I launched our most recent open source version, which is v1.4.0. I ran our basic vanilla command of starting Rancher, which is basically exposing a port. Let's see if I can grab the command to show everyone. I basically just started it. I put a restart policy to say that, restart it unless it is stopped. So basically, if your host gets if your instance gets like rebooted or restarted for some reason, Docker will restart this container, so it'll be running again. Expose port 8080. That's where we can see our UI, and then I just launch Rancher server. So here in the documentation, there's a huge section on installing Rancher. We've expanded it out, so hopefully it's a little easier to find out information that you need. So we can go over the requirements that you might need for being able to start Rancher. We talk about the different tags that we have. So I mentioned that I'm running our latest open source release. So what we do is, the way we version is we have usually like a 140, and that will be our latest, and that we're kind of trying to get feedback from the community, make sure there's nothing majorly broken in it. I mean, it does go through our automated QA, but it's impossible for us to test every single combination or setup that's out there. So if there's something that we haven't tested, we'll find out, and usually about a week and a half after we release it, if there are any major bugs, we fix it, and then we do a patch release of 1.4.1 would be the example for this one, and we'll tag that one as our stable. So those are good things to know. And then being able to run Rancher, I'll kind of cover over the different options you have. So today I just started Rancher server as a single container. It's not in HA mode, so I'm just going directly to that Rancher server. You can do this, and what I'm doing is I'm using the internal MySQL database that's part of the container. Some other options for when you want to start Rancher, you could point to an external database. That's actually highly recommended if you're going to do it in production or anything. I mean, I would recommend using the internal database only if you're kind of developing or playing around with it. But once you start to get serious and you want to use it in a bigger workload, you should use an external database. You can also bind mount the MySQL volume to your host if you wanted to. And then we also support a HA setup. So having multiple Rancher server setups, and what you would do is probably we actually recommend now an ELB, pointing an ELB, or not recommend. If you were to use something in Amazon, in AWS, we would recommend using an ELB. We've noticed that though an ALB is easier to set up, there are some weird, funky things that are going on, but ELB is more reliable. It does also work with, I know someone who's set it up with other load balancer types, so it's just we call out ELB because there are specific requirements in that setup that you would need. If you wanted to use, we'll talk about, there's different ways to authenticate Rancher. And so if you use AD or OpenLDAP and you want to use TLS, then you actually have to pass in some certificates. And then if you set it up and you have an HTTP proxy in front of it, it just goes over notes about how you need to configure your Docker daemon to be able to allow Rancher to be working. Outside of all these options, we also have a separate setup here in terms of for if you wanted to run with SSL. We have some example configurations, and then some more notes about if you're using those load balancers in AWS and how to use self-signed certs. And finally, I know there's some people out there who actually cannot access the internet at all, and so we just have some notes about how you would use to be able to configure Rancher either using your own private registry or being able to use an HTTP proxy. So those are kind of all of our options in terms of running Rancher. Obviously, there's a lot to take in, so usually, get started. I recommend if you're just starting, get started with just the regular one, launch it, play around with it, and then as you figure out, your company or whatever requirements, you can then look into our documentation about how to set it up. If you ever have any issues, ask in our forums, in GitHub. Those people, there are lots of people who have used these combinations and have feedback or have will provide good tips on how to get started. So once you launch the container, you can actually access, so you would go directly to your IP and then whatever port you expose. So I expose publish port 8080, and then it will direct you into a screen. So the first screen that I actually already clicked out of is the first time you launch it, it will ask you if you would allow Rancher to collect some stats. So we would love it if you opted in and let us collect stats. The stats that we're collecting are really just to see what versions people are still running, what type of hosts are people running, what environment types. It just helps us really understand what our user base is doing in terms of what features are they using in Rancher, so that, as we do our roadmap going forward, we would be able to tell, where should we focus our efforts in. Okay, so once you start in Rancher, the first thing to note is that it is actually completely open. It's nothing is like what's it called? Anyone right now could go into this IP and start playing around with my setup. So you can see this big red button. It's saying access control is not configured. We'll go to access control, and this is the first thing I recommend everyone always doing when you start Rancher. It's just because when it's not, it basically means anyone who has access to your IP could use your setup, could access your API, and could play around with it. So you want to kind of lock it down so that it's only available for yourself and whoever other members of your company or team that you want to share with. We support a bunch of different authentication providers. We have Active Directory, we have Azure AD, we have GitHub. You can do a local, which is basically having Rancher store its own database for your users, OpenLDAP, and Shibboleth. So I am actually going to do local because that's the easiest for our demo. Let's put myself in. And then I'm going to enable localauth. Now what happens is Rancher will turn on the authentication. It will actually automatically log me in. You can see now I'm logged in here. And now anyone else who now tries to access it wouldn't be able to get into it. The next step after access controls probably would be how you want to invite others to be able to see your Rancher setup. So there's a couple ways. For local authentication, which is what I've used today, I would go under accounts, I would add account, and I could make an account for Josh. And then whenever you create an account, you have the option to be able to make them as a user or an admin. So the main difference between a user and admin is really the access to this admin tab, and we'll cover that in a second. So I'll just make Josh as a user. Now, if Josh wanted to come, he would be able to log in and be able to have access to the Rancher server environment or server setup. So for the other authentication types, you actually wouldn't add in people through the account screen. We have a different screen that I don't have an easy way to show you, where basically you can add your teams or members. Specifically, it's on the access control site. And what happens is when they log in and try and authenticate against it, accounts will be created here as they've logged into Rancher. So if I had GitHub set up and I had invited my team, as team members sign up in Rancher, accounts are created. Everyone starts off always as a user, so then if you wanted to promote anyone to an admin, you'd come to this account screen, you would be able to edit their type and then change them into an admin. So under the admin tab, the different parts that admins have access to is one is an audit log. So basically once you turn on authentication, you'll start being able to identify who is the users who are making the changes and which API calls are being made. This is great for just tracking of who created what, so that always helps. We have a processes functionality to be able to see what's going on. So it goes and tells you, what's running, it's ready. There's not much except for recently completed because I haven't done anything. So I'll go over all the processes that I've done. This is great for troubleshooting. So, if you have issues in your setup, there's now search available to be able to look for certain things. This is great for troubleshooting. That HA tab just shows if you had HA running. So if I launched HA, then it would show you, the different IPs that you have available for your HA setup and give you information there. We've covered access control. And then there's these two other options for settings and machine drivers. These are more related to how you would set some up about how your environments will look to people, and I'll cover those in more detail as we go through kind of the product. So after access control is set up and we've covered over what's in the admin tab, we're going to then go into our environments. I'm going to go to manage environment. So by default, what happens is when you first launch Rancher Server, there's this thing called the default environment that's created. When you authenticate, whoever is the person who turns on authentication is automatically, one, given admin access to Rancher, and then two, for this default environment, I'm given the ability to be, I am the owner of this environment. So what an environment is basically how you would kind of isolate your resources from each other. So everything in an environment can usually communicate with each other, talk to each other, but they can't talk to anything outside of that environment. So a very common use case is, you might have your dev environment, your test environment, and then your production environment. So you could test out, your changes in development, test them, and do everything before you roll them out into production. In terms of how you create environments, we support this concept of environment templates. So I'll go to add a template so everyone can take a look. By default, we have configured cattle environment, we have configured a default environment template for every orchestration type. So we support these different container orchestration types that are out there. We've pre-configured some default templates. You could make your own templates, and the reason why you might want to make your own templates is you could create them so that you could switch what type of networking you want. You could add in this release in 1.4, we recently added this concept of network policies. So by default, as I said before, all traffic between containers can occur. So communication is between all containers within an environment. With the Network Policy Manager, you could actually change that so that you can configure it to be only inter-stack, so only containers or services in a stack talk to each other. You could do it so that only containers. There's one other one that we enabled. I can't remember now off the top of my head, but You could basically deny traffic so that only containers can only talk to themselves. So there are different things that that we've added. We're adding in more rules in our upcoming releases where we could make it so that only containers within a service can talk to each other. So options are coming in. You could also, if you wanted to use any of our storage abilities, you could enable it in the template. By enabling it in the template, what happens is any environment that you created would automatically get launched with these services. So we call these infrastructure services. I'm going to enable my NFS server in case anyone wants to see a demo of that later on. I'll just do that now. Let me pause real quick while I get my credentials of my server. Just configuring it. Okay, my screen. So now I've configured it. So now if I create a template from an environment from this template, it will automatically always launch NFS. And then there's a couple of framework services. These are services that are required to run to be able to get our infrastructure set up. Let's actually create this. Let's call it NFS enabled. Great. So now you can see down here I have my newly created template along with the default templates available. When you create environments, basically you can select which template you want. Start this one. All right, just call this my environment. What happens is, so before we all talked about access control, and that was all at the Rancher server level. So what happens is if I say I invited Josh to Rancher, he could log in, and what happens is he doesn't actually get access to any of my environments until I actively add him to be able to access my environment. So if he logged in right now, he would get his own default environment. He wouldn't be able to see anything I created. If I wanted him to see it, I would, on the environment level, I could add him to my environment so that when he logs in, he then has the ability to access that environment. In the role of an environment, you have a couple options of when you invite people. One is you can be an owner. An owner is the person who owns the environment. They can add or delete members to the environment. They have access to basically everything in there. That is almost the same as a member. So the member basically has those same abilities. The only difference is that the member cannot add or remove people who have access to that environment. The next one is probably restricted. So some people call that the developer environment, or developer role, where basically you would not have access to the infrastructure. So you wouldn't have access to the hosts that are in the setup, but you would be able to launch services and stacks. And then read-only is pretty self-explanatory, where basically you would be able to see everything, but you wouldn't actually be able to do anything. So you wouldn't be able to delete anything, start anything, stop anything. You'd just be able to see kind of how everything is set up.
Hey Denise, there was a request to add a demo account just to like poke around and check out the setup. So maybe we could add like one of those read-only accounts right now and let other people log in.
Sure, I can do that. Let's see. So I will do demo. I don't know what happens when lots of people try and pass in. So I'm going to call it demo, and then I'll make the password demo. I'll make everyone a user, and then I will add everyone to my Denise environment that I'm going to actually do stuff in. So let's edit this. It would be helpful if I spelled correctly. Okay, so now anyone, if you wanted to out there, play around in my demo. This is the first time we've done this. This is a little scary. You can go to my IP address here. You should be able to log in. The username is demo. The password is demo. And then you should be able to log in and see my environment. My environment's real boring right now, so we'll get to that next. So I'm going to, in my environment, my Denise environment. Here you can see I actually have no hosts. So you can't really do anything unless we have hosts to be able to launch our containers on. So I'm going to do that next. Like I said before, I had a couple hosts already spun up, but we'll go click on Add Host first. The very first time you usually click on Add Host, sorry, there's a screen I was expecting, it usually asks what your registration URL is. That screen looks a little bit like this. It says host registration URL. So that usually comes up, and basically it says, you know, what URL do you want to use to your host to connect to. So basically, the way hosts communicate with Rancher Server is they create a Rancher agent container on these hosts. That container then communicates to Rancher Server container at a certain IP address using a certain password and token to be able to authenticate against it. So usually that's the first screen you'll ever see for adding hosts. After you go to add hosts, you'll be able to see the different options we have. So by default, you have the options of being able to add a custom host. So I'm going to do that first. So here we have custom hosts. I have some hosts here. Let me just take a look to see if this is the one I want to use. It's not the one I want to use. I have here we go. So I have some hosts that I have just pre-pulled some images. They're actually, unfortunately, not the right images. I'm not going to use that host. And all I did is I pre-pulled some of our infrastructure services that are going to run in our agents so that to speed up our demo. I'm going to grab this command here. You can see the command is Docker running. It sets it up. It runs Rancher agent. And then it uses the server URL, and it has that token, password, and key that I was mentioning earlier. So let's run that there. And I'm going to run it on 2 of my hosts. Close this. It should pretty quickly come up with those 2 hosts that I have. You can see I was running Rancher, you know, and I'm running a version of Docker 1.12.3. We just recently added in this release some notes that if you are running a version of Docker that we don't actively test against, it will say unsupported Docker version to just give you a little more awareness of that your Docker version might not be completely compatible. It's not to say that it won't work, it's just to say that it's not part of our testing matrix.
Hey Denise, somebody just let us know that you accidentally set my account to read-only and not the demo one.
Oh yeah, look, someone logged in. I did. That's weird, but okay. I'll have to look at that because. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so Josh and you both are read-only right now. Okay. So under our hosts, I have our 2 hosts. There's a bunch of infrastructure services. Those are all those services that when we were creating our environment templates, those are the ones that are kind of required to be started and launched on your setup so that all the great things about Rancher work correctly. Here you can see, we can go to the stacks page, you can take a look. Basically everything is green and healthy where we have IPsec running. That's what our networking does. Network services helps us launch like our DNS, our metadata. We have health check, which is how we check to see if communication between the hosts and between instances are running correctly. We have the NFS because I enabled NFS in my template, and we have our scheduler, which helps us decide where we would want to schedule our services. Under hosts, we also have add hosts. So I added hosts by using the custom option. That's pretty easy, fair enough. We also have these options where basically there are different cloud providers that all we're doing is calling Docker machine command. So we call a Docker machine command to launch instances in that cloud provider, which then would start up that instance. It would, install Docker. That's all what Docker machine does, and then we would launch the same Rancher agent command that was launched here earlier. So by default, we have these 4 machine drivers shown up. If you want to be able to control as an admin which machine drivers you have available for users, you would go either one, click on that little link that I gave you. Otherwise, under admin machine drivers, you have the ability to select, and you could activate and deactivate different ones. So, I could deactivate Packet if I wanted and activate OpenStack and activate some other ones. Let's activate actually one of the ones that don't, I think there are a couple that don't have a specific special UI. I think OpenStack actually might be one of those. But I'll enable a couple other ones just to see once they're active. We will be able to then go to our host screen. I go back to add host. The ones you can see now that Packet is missing, so I deactivate it. Now the other ones I activated are under this other, and these are the different drivers that I had selected. So if there's no specialized UI for that machine driver, it will just use this generic one that we have. If you wanted to add, so the great thing is you can add your own machine drivers, the ability to add your own, and then you could actually even add your own customized UI if you wanted. So let's see what that kind of looks like and entails so that you can see. So if I want to add a DigitalOcean host, the very first thing I do is grab my access token. I'm going to pause my screen and grab that real quick. Start up my screen again. Start configuring Droplet. So here you can select how many of your hosts that you want to launch in your cloud provider. We have some default settings. They're just the defaults, I think, within Docker Machine. And then you can change those if you want. And there's you can add labels. The reason why you would add host labels is because you would be able to schedule your instances on these hosts accordingly. Some labels. So now what's happening is we're calling Docker Machine. It's going to go create the droplet. When the droplet's created, it will then SSH in and install Docker, and then it will launch the Rancher agent instance. So while that goes on, let's continue. I'll kind of cover over what's under the infrastructure tab. Here you can see our hosts. You can have a view to see all the containers that are running. If you have a volume, one of our volume drivers running, so I have Rancher NF running, you can see it under storage. In 1.4, we just added in a secrets feature. It's experimental. You would need to actually launch the secrets infrastructure service, which you can do later if you forgot to add it in. You could do later by going under our catalog library. I could enable it then. Launch it, see what happens. Under infrastructure, you could then see add and create secrets. Right now, we only have secret support. It's experimental, and there's only support in the UI, but basically the secrets are being able to create secrets that you can then inject into containers without actually having to write those secrets down somewhere. We have certificates, so you could add in certificates for load balancing. And then the last one I wanted to cover is registries. So here you could add in your own private registry using your username and password so that, if you have private registries, you would be able to add them into Rancher and then be able to pull those images when you're starting to launch services. Okay, let's check up on our hosts. Our hosts are still going. In the meantime, what I'm going to actually do is you'll kind of be able to see, so if I go to my default environment, there are no hosts there because I haven't added any. There's demo default, someone logged in before I actually invited them. I'm going to add an environment. I'm going to add a Kubernetes environment. Usually most people like to see what Kubernetes looks like. And the only reason why, I'll add in demo. I will start it now. I'll probably not cover it until the very end because they're just a bunch of Kubernetes services that we run to be able to get it so that the plumbing works with Rancher and Kubernetes. So while we wait for my other host to come up, go to our Kubernetes environment. You can see it needs at least one host. Go to infrastructure. I'll have to grab a new command from here. Once again, I have those hosts I set up earlier. Sorry, 1 second. I don't know why the URL is not being generated. So I'm gonna, there it goes. Basically, this command, the Rancher agent command on the add host screen, is unique to every environment that you have. So I'm just going to grab this one, and then I'm going to find my hosts. These are my Kubernetes hosts. Basically, they're going to spin up, and then they'll start. You can see the infrastructure stacks that we have here is similar to the default that's in Cattle, except for the Kubernetes stack, which has about 10 other services needed as well. Let's go back into my regular environment, my Cattle environment. We're going to finally start launching some containers. So now at this point, basically, I've kind of all set it up so that you can start launching containers or services, as we call them. Define a service. So a service is essentially a container with a scale. So it will be the same container, and you can scale it to however many. So that's what we call a service. So I can either run one container of it, or I could run, I'll run two. I will run a simple app blog that I always use as a demo. I will, oops, not called blog. The ghost image is just like a blogging site. So if I want to publish a port, I can publish port 2368, and then that is actually the same as the private port that is exposed in the Docker file for that container. So what I'm doing is basically whichever host that will launch this container, we will be publishing this port so that you can access into that container. Anything that, we try and support anything that a Docker run command supports. And then most of these are in these options here: command, volumes, networking, security hosts. Secrets is new for when you want to create secrets. You can do a health check. So this is a Rancher concept where you can add health checks to containers so that if your host goes down, then Rancher would realize or know that that host has, that instance is no longer available, and if you wanted to maintain the scale of 2 containers, it would then relaunch a new one. You could add labels to containers, and the whole reason of labels on usually services as well as on hosts is for scheduling. So Rancher gives this great ability for you to schedule your hosts basically however you want them to. So you could create a rule to say I want the host to have or have not, or should not have certain host labels. So you could do it based on host labels. You can do it based on container labels, service name, or container name. I'm going to actually specifically say I don't want it on my DigitalOcean host, so they must not have a label, only because I pre-pulled these images. I'm going to create these. And here under my hosts, you can see that it's being created on, this is my Rancher OS host, so it's created here, as well as it's already been created there. We have a concept of stacks. So what stacks are, basically how you can group your services together. It's a nice way to be able to organize your services. So if you have like one application, usually the best way to organize your services is by application. Most people do that. Under my default, I have my blog here. One, I can click on the port what will that do is it brings me to one of the host IPs of where the container is running, uses the port that I had published, and then it basically brings me into the container. Another couple of cool things I like to usually show is if you are looking at all your applications and you want to know a little high-level information about your service, you can click on this information button. What that does is gives you basically what I said, high-level information. If you had like containers spinning or running here, you can actually right-click on it to view them, do different things. You could, I think, click directly on them, and they would bring you to the container details view. You can see which hosts have the ports exposed on them and whether or not your service is linked anywhere. So that's like a really simple example of how you can publish ports in launching containers and publish that port so it's exposed. I'm going to create another one. Create another stack because this will be a different application. So let's start from the beginning. I have my app itself. It is one of my coworkers' images where she has just taken NGINX. She's made it so that there is a nice URL for me to go to so then I can see what container ID is there. And then what we do is I'll load balance against it, and then we can refresh the screen and watch the load balancer go between the different containers. A couple of things. There is, by default, there's always pull image before creating. If you're a developer, you want to leave this checked because what happens is usually we've found that most developers, they will be creating their container or creating their image. They'll push it to Docker Hub, and they're going to want to reuse the same tag. And then they want to see that, that new, whatever they've done, newly shown up in Rancher. Whenever they create a new container, it will re-pull a new image. So you could check that so that it will always pull an image before it creates. I uncheck it in my demos because I've already pre-pulled all the images to try and make it a little faster. I'm just going to schedule these, once again, actually not on my custom host, my non-DigitalOcean host. So just say where it does not have that label. That's going to go, let's see, I forgot to scale it. So after you can see I only have one container. I actually want lots. So you can edit it and scale it to like 10. And then it'll go up and start scaling. After this, I'm going to actually add a load balancer to point to my container. So here, for our load balancer, we have a lot of options. I'm not going to be able to cover all of them. If you have questions about them, please go into our docs for Cattle, under the load balancer section. We cover basically all the options of how you can do it either in the UI or if you're using Compose, how you could set it up in your Compose files. Here, I'm just going to set it up really easily where basically I'm going to expose port. Let's do 8081. I'm going to choose my service, and then the port that is available in the container is port 80. That's the one that's exposed in the Docker file. I'm actually going to schedule these against my host that is my DigitalOcean host, so they have the LB equals true. And then I'm going to say always run one instance of this container. So we have like two types of scaling options here. One is you can say how many specific containers you want, so maintain that scale of that number, that quantity. The other option is something what we call a global scale. So you could click this one where it's basically saying for all your hosts that match whatever scheduling rule that you've put in, make sure there's always one instance running. I'm going to create this. This one should come up fairly quickly. And you can see that there are 3 containers because I have 3 of those DigitalOcean hosts. Go there. Take a look. You can see at the top here under my Stack app, load balancers are being all run. And then in my Stack app, my other ones, it has, I guess, most of my containers on the first one of the hosts, not the other. Let's wait until until these are all green. Whenever you see a load balancer in initializing, what that's doing is it's just verifying that your cross-host communication is working, so making sure that, you know, we can talk across all the hosts. So now, to kind of give you a quick summary of how we've set up our application, we have all of our NGINX apps actually running on our hosts that are in AWS. We have our load balancers all running on our DigitalOcean hosts. If I click on here, it will redirect us to those NGINX containers. So that's how our containers have cross-host communication and kind of can discover each other and talk to each other. If I refresh this, we will continue to see this welcome to NGINX page, even though they are all separate containers. That's not really helpful for us. So I will go to our fancy URL, which basically brings up our container ID. If I refresh it, it usually will jump. Sometimes it doesn't refresh in the UI because it has already cached it, and it doesn't refresh it. And I always forget the command of how to release that. But you can see that it's jumping between the different containers. So that's a really simple example of load balancing. Again, that's like L4 load balancing. We do support like L7, which is where you start to have like host name and paths and different target and source ports. We have concept of selector load balancing. So the way I load balance is I actually directed specifically at a service, but you can do a selector rule, which basically says, hey, any instances I create later in my Rancher setup, if they have, you know, they match these values, then the load balancer should start directing traffic to there. Once again, all that information is under our load balancer page here, so you can read all about it if you have that desire. Okay, so I know we're coming up to the hour. I've tried to not talk as fast as I normally do on purpose, just because normally I speed through it, and I know we kind of lose people. I don't know if there are any specific questions, but there's like one major thing I want to talk about before I actually move on to questions is everything today so far I've done is all in the UI. Everything that the UI does is an API call. If I go into the audit log again, you can kind of see all the API calls that have been made as it's gone on. It looks like a lot of people in the demo are clicking on a bunch of stuff as I see the demo account is being used. Everything that you use here, yeah, it goes in the API. So the API is available. So if you go to API keys, there's two types of API keys, and this is what always trips people up, especially if you've been using Rancher before. So we have two types of API keys. We have account API keys and environment API keys. So an account key is like tied to your account. It's like very self-explanatory. It's tied to your account. If you use it, basically you don't get directed into any specific environment. If you want to go specifically into my environment, you would use this environment API key. The distinction here is really for if you're using any of our CLI tools. If you use Rancher CLI, you want to use an account API key. The account level allows you to be able to pick between the environments of what you want to manage, like launch hosts or do anything within it. You can switch between the environments. If you are using Rancher Compose, this is where it really is important, you want to use an environment API key. That specifically targets which environment you want to use. If you accidentally pick up an account API key and you use Rancher Compose, it will not work. And we will cover over what the CLI is in a little bit. I can click into my endpoint here. You can kind of see our API. In our docs, we have a whole separate section about, you know, how to use the API. There's some terminology things that don't match up in the API and in the UI. I'm not going to cover it. It's, you know, if you want to use the API, please look at our docs. If you have questions about how to use it, go to our forums, go to GitHub. Vincent, who is very active in both, he is our UI guru. He actually uses the API all the time, obviously, to create the UI, so he can help you out if you need anything. For the CLI, at the bottom, you have download CLI. We have two options, Rancher Compose, Rancher CLI. You know, we're trying to, anything you can kind of do in Rancher Compose, you can do most functionality in the Rancher CLI, so we're trying to encourage people to start using the CLI. I can download it. I always have lots of versions on my setup. If I go to a terminal, command line, do a new one, close some of these up. That's the wrong way. Okay. So let's navigate. I forget. Okay. So here you can see the binary. So the very first thing that you want to do is actually you want to configure your CLI. So you would run rancher config. It will ask for the URL of your rancher setup. It will then ask for your access key and secret key. So here I can add in, again, rancher CLI uses an account API key. So I can create it, set it up. And here you can see it will ask like which environment do you want to start doing stuff in. I'll pick number 2. And then under the Rancher CLI, I have lots of options of what you can do. What we'll do is kind of cover over how Rancher Compose and what that means and how that works and ties with this Rancher CLI. So for all the services that you have created, go into our user here. These can all be directly translated into Docker Compose files. If you're not familiar with Docker Compose, please read up about it in Docker, and then you can come back and kind of play around with how it works in Rancher. So your application, if you click on your stack itself, you'll get into a more detailed view of the stack, and you'll be able to click on this Compose YAML. And what that does is it shows you what the Docker Compose equivalent is. And then we have a Docker Compose YAML file and a Rancher Compose YAML, where the Docker Compose YAML is like something that you could dump into Docker, and it should Docker Compose, and it would be able to run by itself without any issues. And then at least Rancher Compose YAML was originally introduced because if you had keys that were invalid in your Docker Compose file, Docker Compose would be unhappy with it, and so we were trying to maintain compatibility. So I think in a future release we'll be merging them all together so that you could just use one YAML file. I'm going to create these files. And here I'm actually, the only thing I'm going to change is I'm just going to expose a different port so we don't have a port conflict. Grab my Rancher Compose. So basically what you can do is, if you're running Rancher Compose, it's very similar commands, but basically in Rancher CLI, I would just do a Rancher. I think it's, pick a stack name, and then I would do -D to not block it. Basically now I'm using the command line to basically create my stack. You can here see the CLI stack. It's creating, has that one change where it's 8082 instead, but it will basically bring up your services using the command line instead of using the UI. I know some people prefer one or the other. While that comes up, you can kind of see the different commands we have. We have support for catalog, obviously to configure. Some neat ones I think is like, if you wanted any host that you launched using our machine drivers, so that were launched in Docker Machine, you could actually just use the Rancher CLI to run Docker commands on them. You can do different stuff with environments. You can exec into your containers directly from our command line. You can, there's lots and lots of options. I won't be able, obviously, to cover all of those today. You could do a Rancher PS, which will show all the services there are. I think, let's see, you could do a PS-C for containers. But yeah, lots of functionality in the CLI. You should play with it. You can bring up stuff using Compose. And okay, so the final thing probably in the generic of all of Rancher concepts that I haven't covered is our catalog. So here we have our catalog. Our catalog is what we use to be able to launch our infrastructure services. So those are the services. If we go back to, your templates. We also have, so we have two types of catalogs here. We have a library that is usually things that Rancher is putting out, stuff that we either certify currently or have plans to certify, so things that we want our users to use. Anything that, say, you forgot to put in your environment template and you want to then launch into Rancher itself, you would go to the catalog and library, and I could, like I did before, you could deploy these things as you want them. We also have our community catalogs. Our community is really active at creating catalog templates, and what these templates are just a very complicated application that someone else has already put together how you can do it so that it's easy for you to launch. The community is great at adding things, and then as newer versions come out or changes, they usually update that. You can see with Rancher's catalog service, you can see, I'm trying to find one where I know it has an older version. You can see the different versions that are available. I'm going to purposely launch this older one. When you start it, you'll be able to see that, hey, you're running an older version when you compare it against the catalog, and you can upgrade to the newer version. The settings for a catalog in Rancher is under admin settings. So catalog, you can add your own private catalog. So in the documentation, we do cover under catalog, creating private catalogs. So if you want to create your own catalog, your own templates to be able to use in Rancher, you can do that yourself. You can, if you don't want people to use the community catalog for some reason, you could disable that. In a future version of Rancher, right now our catalogs are actually for the whole Rancher setup. In a future version of Rancher, we'll be having support for catalogs per environment, so you could really drill down to say, if I have my private catalog, I actually don't want anyone who has access to Rancher to use them. That is coming up in the next release. So that is our catalog, and then the only other thing I was going to switch to is probably showing the Kubernetes. I know we're running up to our time. I don't know, Josh, if there's anything else specific people wanted to ask, or are there any questions while I'm in the Cattle environment that might be good?
There was a request to demo upgrades.
Upgrades of services, upgrades of Rancher?
Sorry. Rancher server upgrades.
Rancher server upgrades. Okay, that requires starting an older version, which I can do. Okay, I can do that. I'm going to first, before we kind of like switch into that topic, I'm just going to go quickly into Kubernetes just to show people. So for Kubernetes, let's see, under our infrastructure stacks, you can see there are all these things to get Kubernetes running. If you use kubectl, you could either use it in our shell within the UI. I actually anticipate most people would actually generate a configuration to be able to run kubectl from your desktop to be able to launch stuff into Rancher. You could also go into the Kubernetes dashboard. There's something wrong with my setup, but I don't know why, so I'll have to bring that back to the team to go check out what is wrong with it. I'll have to look at that. But let's see. Let me figure out the best way. Okay. Sorry, I'm just thinking in my head of how we want to do this. So I'm going to use actually the same host that I have already running Rancher. I am going to pick a different port, so I don't have a port conflict. To publish, I am going to run version 1.3.4. Whenever you start Rancher, just to let you know, it usually takes 1 or 2 minutes before you'll get the UI up and running. You can trace the logs, tail the logs to be able to see like where you are. They'll have like lots of like, at one point it'll start saying 1 out of, I don't know what the current number is, before it'll be up and running 1 out of 83. That'll go a little bit, and then we'll actually go to the URL and wait for it to come up. Oops. 81, I think I use. See, oh, here's that stats page that I was talking about. I hope that you leave it checked and you say got it. I usually uncheck it because we don't want our own internal stats to make it change in any way. Probably would help to add some hosts so you guys can see what happens there. So let me add some hosts. Here's that host registration URL. Save this, pause my screen. I'm going to grab my access token. Start up my screen again. And we'll just add 2 hosts in there. I'm just going to add some hosts so you can see what happens. I'm going to add some, I'll just probably pick a couple things from the catalog just so that they launch, and then we can upgrade Rancher. It's actually really, I think it's really easy to upgrade Rancher, but it also depends on how you've set it up. So while we wait for this, it's probably good to go to the docs page to go over upgrading Rancher. So when you upgrade Rancher, it all depends on, your upgrade all depends on how you set up Rancher to begin with. So if you have an HA setup, there are different instructions. If you are using an external database, you basically are just running the same container, just pointing to your database again. Same with, I think, that's like how you upgrade. I'll show you how to upgrade if you're using our MySQL database, internal one. So that kind of, it really all depends on how you set it up. While we wait for everything to spin up, because it'll take a little bit. I don't know, is there any other questions out there, Josh?
There was a request to show how the volume systems work, like after you've already started an NFS stack.
Oh yeah, we can do that. That's a great idea. While we wait for that to come up. So let me just grab this. I'm going to start a new browser. I'm going to go back. So for those who did not follow along, basically on my host, I have 2 Rancher server containers running right now. At 8080, I have my original one that I've been using for this whole demo. At 8081, I have the new one that I'm running an older version to show you how upgrade works. That means I typed my password in wrong when I created my account. That is going to be a problem. Usually, let's see. Trick. Oh no. Okay, this might not. That's so weird. Okay, the password that I knew I used, I must have typed it wrong because I can't log into it, which means I made a mistake somewhere. Okay, we will wait for 8081 to come up. I will start NFS again, and I will be able to show you the volume stuff. Let me just pause my screen while I configure NFS. screen again. Oh, so we have our hosts starting to come up. So now I'll wait for these to come up. And then, so what we can do is I'll upgrade Rancher, or actually I'll demo the volume stuff once it comes up, and then I'll upgrade Rancher server for you guys. Okay, looks like we are almost up and running. I will start getting our volume test. Do a bunch of containers. Cool. Okay, so the way to use our volume driver support is after you've started your volume driver, you would put the name of the volume driver. Ours is called Rancher-NFS. Usually whatever the volume driver name is under the storage part is what you would want to pick. That is typically what the stack name is, just to give everyone a tip. And then you want to create a volume. So in here, I just need to, so I'm creating a volume that is basically today's demo, because I have one NFS server that I like to reuse. What you do is you create your volume name, and then you put a colon, and then you put where you would want it in your container. So I'll put my path of Denise in container, and I can create that volume. And create my service, which will have that volume. So I'll take a little bit for those to get started. I'm going to click into it. Watch. And then what I'm going to do, just before I do, I'll let you guys know. So right now they're all sharing a volume together. What I will do is I will exec into one of the containers. I will create like a file. I'll close out of that container. I will then go into another container, and you can see that that file is in that same directory. I can like edit the file, and those edits will be saved and like propagated to all the containers in my service. Let's do that. Let's exec in. So I can go into my special directory. There's no file right now. And create a test file and say hello. Save my file. Let's see my file. First, let's go. We are in my default stack of my service volume test, and this is the first container of it. And close that. I'll go to one further down. If I exec in there, you can see I'm now in the same stack and service. It's just now I'm in number 3. So 1, you can see that the file exists. 2, you can see it says everything in it. If I actually make edits to it, and save my edits. 1, you can see in this container, my file has changed. If I go into my original container, the first one, I exec in, I basically show that same file. You can see that the edits that were made in a previous other container have been propagated to my container here. Hopefully that kind of shows you how our persistent storage works. If you have more questions or want to know more about it, under our infrastructure services in the docs, under persistent storage, we talk about it. We have actually different types of volumes that you could create, not through the UI, but through Compose. So that exists, so you can look into that. But the main thing is when you start a service, you would need to put it in that volume section, the volume driver, and what your volume would want to be. So, okay, so now we're back to trying to upgrade Rancher server. So here we can see we're version 1.3.4. I'm going to show you our Rancher agent is running 1.1.3. And then we will go to our terminal. Stop this. Okay, so first things first is we are going to stop our container. So I'm going to stop container that's running Rancher 1.3.4. And then I'm going to, if you can use this command only if you are basically using the MySQL database that's inside of our image. So inside it, we'll be running that. So do 8081 again. And then you do the volumes from Goering source. And then you would run your new version of your container. We'll let that go. If you had your external database, all you do is basically run the same command that you had run for your external database. You just had changed your image name to the latest image tag. So we could hit the logs of this. It's going to take a little bit to get up and running. We can go under our page and see if unreachable, getting started. Now it looks like it'll be ready. Now that we're in, you can see that we're running 1.4. All of our previous stacks are still running because they're on host. This is actually a great thing. So what happens is in 1.3.4, we have all these infrastructure services that are running, and then you upgrade Rancher server. After you upgrade Rancher server, we highly recommend you go to your infrastructure stacks page for your environment, and it will tell you that an upgrade basically is required. Like, we want you to be running our latest infrastructure service against our latest Rancher server. So the best way to do that is you do them one by one. So I will upgrade, click upgrade. I'll wait for it. Health check. A lot of people sometimes ask if there's an order of how you upgrade your infrastructure services. At this time, there is no specific order. When you upgrade them, you can upgrade them kind of in whatever order you want. The one thing that I really usually emphasize on is that when you're upgrading, you should upgrade them all the way before you go to the next one. So you can see this is like in its upgrading state. It's probably pulling the new image. All of them have new images. So they're just pulling all the new images down. And once it's in upgraded state, there'll be like a little bar that says finish upgrade. Don't try and like speed up the process by clicking upgrade on all of them. That does not work out well. So just upgrade them one at a time. Eventually, it will say upgraded, finish upgrade. So I'll finish upgrade. I'll get into active state. Next one, same thing. So we acknowledge at Rancher right now that upgrading your infrastructure stacks is not the greatest experience. So we are putting together an upgrade manager. We're hoping to put that in the next release to be able to help manage your upgrades, especially your infrastructure stacks, easily. Just going. Just while we wait for this, Josh, is there anything else that people have requested to demo that I could set up beforehand, or is it all?
There was a question. I'm looking for it now. Maybe we did get to it. Or actually, there was somebody who was asking about like general like upgrades from Convoy to NFS. Like how do you switch from the old version to the new Rancher NFS?
I actually don't have a good solution for that. I don't know what the correct path is. I can go back to engineering and ask. I know there have been people out there asking for that migration path to see if there's a good path. So I can take it up with the engineering team to see what options there are available. So continue or upgrade. I mean, if there's no more questions, it sounds like there's not any more questions. I mean, you're welcome to stay and watch me upgrade all my infrastructure services, but like, I have confidence that like nothing will go wrong where as long as you upgrade them one at a time. The main thing is to know that you should, anytime after you upgrade Rancher server, you should always check your infrastructure stacks because that is usually when we release and test new services to be compatible. That's how we add in enhancements or updates for it. So yeah, otherwise I mean, I'll finish upgrading all my services, and then after that, I'll probably say that's it. And there are no more other questions.
There was a request to see a custom host added, but I think that just means adding a host to the Docker run command, which you did a few times throughout the demo, correct?
Yes. Adding a custom host, yeah, you just have to add it through the command line. You grab the URL of grab the URL from here. I'll upgrade this one. Okay, so I'm looking at, I'm going to take a look at the questions. Okay, I see someone asked can Rancher NFS be used on a container running on Rancher OS? Yes, I don't see why that would be any problem. There's no reason that would not be able to work. I see Philip Alberg has asked me to try and troubleshoot my Kubernetes environment. Let's see. Okay, so now we're in a state where everything is up to date. Everything is good in Rancher. That it would probably conclude your upgrades. You can see it probably took like, 4 or 5 minutes, or maybe a little bit longer to just upgrade your setup. So when you're upgrading, just expect to be able to dedicate some time to be able to do it. Obviously, if you have multiple environments, you would then have to kind of do these same steps of upgrading your infrastructure stacks in each environment. I would, let's see. Let me see if I can guess. The problem is I cannot actually get into my environment anymore because I know what password I put in, but it's not working, which is really embarrassing.
Have you tried Denise?
No, it's not that. I saw someone's comment on that. That is not what it is.
Just want to check.
Oh, maybe it's. Oh, I know what it is. It is not Denise, but the username is Denise. Thank you for whoever suggested that. Okay, I'm in. I would never make my password the same as my username. That would be too uncreative, people. Okay, so for Kubernetes. So the Kubernetes itself is working. As you can see, all the stacks are green. I predict that if I wanted to use the kube control, so the easiest way for me is to actually just do it on my terminal because I have some files. Get a new one. So let me just set up my kube control, and then I'll navigate, and I don't think Kubernetes itself is down. I think it's just dashboard. Access to the dashboard is not quite working. Go to here. So if I do kube control create file, and if I do my, I gotta start an nginx before I use any ingresses. Oops. It would help if I could spell. Okay, so I don't know if we'll be able to see them now that I think about it. Okay, without a dashboard, this is a big problem. So usually what happens is when it says service unavailable, that means something is wrong. There's like some API thing where the Kubernetes API might be having an issue, and that's why we can't proxy into it. All the containers are green though, which is always weird. I'm just going to try one other thing of creating an ingress to make sure our ingresses are being created. So you can see in our host Kubernetes, what's going on? Hurt my environment. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go under my infrastructure stacks. Oh man. Okay. I need to note what I did. I'll bring that one to the team. Basically, I managed to hurt my infrastructure stacks view by creating an ingress. I would have to go back to engineering to go figure out what exactly is going on here. I actually have not used the new dashboard for Kubernetes that we've set up. I actually haven't used it until today. Obviously, it was not the greatest experience for all of you, but it should be fixed. I'm very surprised that this is going on. Okay, I'll have to go back into engineering. My next training next month, I will promise to have a better way of being able to diagnose this. I'll probably I'll create an issue in GitHub if you want to follow what happened and see how it gets fixed or how it gets addressed. That'd be fine too. I'll create an issue in GitHub to have the team look at it. Outside of that, now I feel real bad because it looks like my demo looks ended on such a poor note. Okay, I think everything else, that's about it. And I don't know if I have any other things to show today. So I guess, I had mentioned many times, I run this once a month. It usually is basically the same topics over and over once a month. If you want to do more advanced topics, we have a monthly meetup at the end of every month. And otherwise, you can try and find us online. We try our best to answer as much as we can. So hope everyone has a good day today, and come back again if you have more questions, and I can try and answer those for you. Thanks, guys.